Welcome to Practically Christian. I'm Jake, and I'm here with Luke.
Hi, guys.
And Janelle.
Hello.
We share conversations that help you know Jesus more deeply and follow him more faithfully. The truth is, no one has arrived at Christ's likeness. To grow in that direction, we believe you need authentic relationships and biblical theology applied to your everyday life. We hope that you are encouraged to grow and to live out the biblical truths that we discuss on this episode, as we have a knockdown, drag-out fight about obeying laws.
That's right. Today we're going to talk about can a Christian speed, break the speed limit while they're driving, or break the law in other harmless ways? That's kind of the question we're exploring today. This is in our series of Can a Christian ... And for those of you who don't know, this is coming out of something our church has done recently, where we asked members of our congregation, what are some topics we should cover. And we did a sermon series at our church covering the most commonly asked questions, like can a Christian consume alcohol or cannabis? Can a Christian get an abortion? And to be clear, they're not like, is it physically possible for a Christian to do things? We don't mean it, can a Christian in that sense. We mean, should a Christian, if they're living the way God wants them to do, how should a Christian act and behave? And so this is kind of an interesting one. Can a Christian speed or break the law in other harmless ways? So just to get us moving this direction, besides speeding, what are some other harmless ways that people commonly break the law?
One of the ones that came to mind for me is a lot of times there are lots of code restrictions for how to build things, or you have to get permits to do such and such. And that's honestly to keep people safe, because if you do your electrical wrong, you can burn down your house or whatever. But at the same time, if you have the skills and you're doing it the right way, but you don't want to pay all this extra money to go through the permitting process or whatever, is it wrong to just, put a new bedroom in your living room?
Without telling anyone.
It's like yes and no. I don't know. Or it seems harmless.
Yeah. I break rules on trails while hiking all the time, whether that be climbing waterfalls that you're not supposed to climb, or getting lost, which also happens quite often. But just ignoring where you're supposed to walk when it comes to national parks.
So can a Christian speed? Can a Christian cut trails?
Can a Christian break housing code?
Yeah, break housing code.
One of these seems worse than the others.
So for this series, in this question, we are practicing the framework of first looking at what the Bible teaches, and then asking the question of wisdom. What is the wise thing for me to do in light of my family, personality, history, and then how will my behavior affect others in good ways and bad ways, and for Christians and non-Christians. So we're going to kind of work through all of these. First of all, what does the Bible teach about obeying authorities? So the key text is Romans chapter 13. I'll go ahead and read it before we discuss it. Here we go. Romans 13, verses 1 through 7. Paul writes, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, and honor to whom honor is owed." So what I glean from this is that if you don't have a good reason, or if it would not violate God in general, you should obey the governing authorities. Does that sound about right?
No.
Nope. All right.
so
This is why it's going to be a knockdown fight.
And I think that's how a lot of people read it.
Yeah.
I think there's a few problems with that.
Sure.
Number one is that the word subject doesn't mean obey.
Okay.
It can. I was looking up in Greek. I'm not good at Greek, but I can use the tools. It can if it's in the middle voice, but it doesn't if it's not in the middle voice. Mean obey.
Or it doesn't have to.
It doesn't. Well, so the word in Ephesians 5:21, which says, "Wives, be subject to your husbands." That's the same word.
Okay.
And we don't take that to mean obey. When it says, "Children, obey your parents," that is a different word.
Okay.
And so the idea that like this means submit to authority, but that doesn't necessarily mean obey, which I think goes into something that we're going to talk about later, which is like, how do you be subject when the authorities are against God? But I think the point is like it never, and even like at the end of this, it doesn't say obey who being obeyed is owed at the end. And so there's this idea of like submit, or the word subject means like rank under in the military, basically is the word, what they would use that for. So it's like respect, give them authority, but it's not necessarily saying obey.
Yeah, so you would like compare it to husbands and wives. So wives submitting to husbands does not mean obey in everything.
Yeah, exactly. Even if like those things don't go against God, you can still say no to things in a submission kind of relationship.
What do you think, Janelle?
Yeah, I mean, based on my behavior, because true confessions, I am a little bit of a speeder. And I do tend to do the thing where I'm like, well, what's the heart of the law? Safety. So I'm going to be safe. And yeah, I tend to have that attitude toward rules that don't seem to always be the right thing. But then if I got pulled over, I pay my ticket and I apologize to the officer. Like like it's this weird mix of I am submitted, like they have the authority to do that, and I don't begrudge that authority. But I also don't not speed. So I think I would probably, practically speaking, probably fall a little bit more along the lines of what Jake is saying.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, if I wanted to be more perfect, I would probably obey all these rules that I sometimes think are silly. Or
yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this passage in this question because it says, "Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval." And I almost think of that as like, you don't want to be scared of cops while you're driving? Like, drive the speed limit. Like, if you don't want to have the
registration up to date.
Yeah. Praise God, serving for your good. But if you do wrong, if you are going to break the speed limit, be afraid, for he doesn't bear the sword in vain. Like, and the sword, I think, is pretty metaphor. Like, the ability to punish or inflict, tickets in this case. And full confession, I speed also. I mean, not as much as Janelle or some other people.
I was trained to drive with my father. What can I say?
No, but there is like I think, in the sense of like submitting or being subject to, and this is me. I'm assuming that it's probably most people who speed. I notice every speed limit sign, and I take that into consideration. Right?
Like, as far as like it's saying something about safety.
Yeah, it's saying something about safety. My mom taught me when we were learning to drive that if you can't safely drive 10 miles over the speed limit, then you're not good enough to drive. Those were her words. And I actually think but it's like that level of like, if the speed limit says 35, I'm going to take that into account. I'm going to think about why it says 35. It's because it's a school zone. And
school zones are 25 or 20.
Well, no, they're 25 if the light is blinking.
That's when the school zone is active.
Yeah. So, but if they're not, it's 35 or in front of Elizabeth High School. I've seen the sign. You so I'm gonna go slower around there, regardless, all the time. But maybe honestly, maybe I'll speed, maybe I'll go 40. But I'm not gonna go 70 because I'm like, wow, the authorities probably have something going on here about reducing the speed limit. But also, I think that I can drive safely faster than they probably think.
And how would you respond to getting a ticket? Do you begrudge that? Or do you feel...
It depends. If I get caught speeding for a ticket, it's like, sometimes it's kind of like, I'll be honest, like a little bit of like an eye roll moment. It's like me and the officer both know that the speed limit is too slow here. But, no, actually I think there are, you pay the ticket, you do what you need to do, right? It's like, you get over it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, or maybe it's a guideline in some ways, is how it feels, at least to me.
Mm-hmm. I think we're all pretty close to the same page, because I think I have like a complicated answer to this question. I feel like, yes, you should obey the governing authorities, but then it's almost like, what are the most important laws, or the most important like guidelines for society and having a just society, and driving 5 miles over the speed limit is not going to cause injustice and anarchy. And even so, here's what nudges me even further that direction, is considering number one, the wisdom question. You were getting at this, Jake.
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I driving safely? Mm-hmm. Or you said the same thing, Janelle, right? Like,
what's the heart of the law?
Yeah, what's the heart of the law is to drive safely, not just for you driving, but also for the other people around. Like certain neighborhoods, you should drive slower because there's more houses and more kids, etc. So am I driving safely is the wisdom question, and then also how it'll affect others, both Christians and non-Christians. And like my hypothetical situation I came up with was, imagine every single Christian drove the speed limit all the time. Would the world be a better place or a worse place?
A worse place.
I think so too.
I do remember someone saying, like, they're like, it's kind of like darned if you do, darned if you don't. Like, it's like, if you drive the speed limit, people are like, why are you driving so slow? And if you speed, they're like, you're speeding, you naughty person.
I think that's true. Like, if you have a Jesus fish on the back of your car and someone sees you speeding, they're like, oh, hypocrite. And if you drove the speed limit, like, oh my gosh, those Christians are so annoying.
Well, that was, I don't know if it was you or Pastor Alan, like 10, 12 years ago, we were talking, it was like, someone was like, what if everyone just left church going the speed limit and everyone could see that? And I don't remember who it was, but they were like, they'd probably hate Christians and be pissed because they'd be late to where they were going.
I mean, I will say, not everyone lives in our area. We live in a rural area, and there are lots of roads that do not have any houses on them.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they're 45 miles per hour versus being 60, and they could be 60. And so, like, I feel like maybe someone listening and they live in suburbia with little kids playing in the street are like, what? You guys aren't banging the speed limits? But, like, it is a different, like, the danger in our area is mostly hitting a deer that jumps out when you're not expecting, more so than actually, like, harming a person. Yeah, so just want to put that out there with the speeding conversation, because not everyone lives in our area or a similar area.
Could we discuss the question of verse 2?
Okay.
I think it's or verse 2 through 4, right? It says, therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For the rulers are not a terrorously good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority, then do what is good, and you will receive his approval? For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. So a couple questions come up to me in this. Number one is resisting the same as disobedience? Because it doesn't seem like Paul's actually saying resist means disobedience. It feels to me like it's like fighting against the authority.
Like almost like don't riot.
Is what it feels like. And then the other thing that really comes up to me in this is the idea of the government being the servant for your good. I think we often miss this in this question, because it's like kind of the question of like, well, what does God do to bad servants? We see throughout the Old Testament over and over, he replaces them, he gets rid of them. You're not supposed to obey them. Right? Like, you shouldn't obey Ahab and Jezebel. They were bad servants.
Yeah, but I think mainly we're talking about legitimate laws. Like, speeding is not something that, like,
It's hurtful
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason this comes up to me, right, is because I was just reading a book called The Nightingales about Nazi Germany or Nazi France. I think it was actually a book that you gave to Teresa that she gave to me.
The Kristen Hanna one?
I think so. I don't know the author. But does that, like, how does that play into this whole thing? Does it play into it as much? And I know it's like we're talking about like minor laws, but I think people can often like be really confused by this passage because they're like, so you're supposed to listen to Nazi Germany as long as it's laws that don't go against your conscience? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I've struggled with these verses in being an American and knowing our American history, and like on just a face value plain reading, it's like, I don't know if the war for independence should have, like, was that really justified based off of this?
Because we didn't want to pay taxes on
Yeah,
paper.
and we weren't represented.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it kind of like runs into, we don't have to talk about that more now, but I just wanted to point out that I don't think this passage is cut and dry. Obey your government. Number one, because it doesn't say obey. And number two, I don't think it's saying if you disobey your government, you're disobeying God. Right? I think that's sometimes, and that plays more into like the question we're talking about is like, if you speed, are you sinning? It's like, I don't think so. I think I don't think that counts as resisting your government, and I don't think that it's actually telling us to obey in the first place.
Yeah, I do think like government is supposed to have this good role of, I'm gonna say like creating the environment for goodness, like creating a peaceable place and a safe place, carrying out justice. Like those are all really good, beautiful gifts that God, I think, ordains governments to carry out. And when governments don't do those things, I also think they'll be held to account, especially throughout the Old Testament. But I think even in the New Testament, there's a sense of like, God's going to hold the rulers and authorities to account.
Yeah. And I think on the question of wisdom, that's where we get a little bit interesting, because I'm going to bring up drunk driving, when we talk about alcohol, we have a law, and it actually changes based on what state you're in, about what it means to be drunk.
Right.
What percent. I'm pretty sure Colorado's 0.08, but I'm not 100% sure. That's the most common one. But I think it's very possible for someone to be drunk at 0.06, and it's very possible for someone not to really be drunk until 0.10, right? Depending on their body, depending on, you know. And if you are 0.09 and you are not acting drunk, you're not feeling drunk, would it be a sin to drive, or would it be morally wrong to drive?
Yeah, and I think
At
so.
that point.
This is the thing that comes in with the wisdom question. Is I remember watching, it was a TV thing, and it was this guy who was a ridiculous speeder. Like he would be going 70 in a 35 or whatever. And his, I don't know if his wife, his girlfriend or whatever, was like, I don't feel safe with him, like, driving. Like, he is crazy. And he'd be one of those, like, weavers on the highway where he's, like, trying to be as fast as possible and, like, weaving through traffic in order to do so. But he felt that he was very much in control, and he could say, I've never been in an accident. I'm a safe driver. And I don't mind jerky motions, and I don't mind... stopping on a dime, and my car is capable of it. So it's almost like everyone in their right mind pretty much would look at him and be like, you are a crazy driver, and it feels very unsafe on the road with you, both in the car and everyone else who's getting cut off suddenly. Yeah. But he perceived from his own perspective, he perceived himself to be a very safe driver. Yeah. And so, like, I feel like that's one of the hard things that I think is a little bit like submitting to a community, because if you just think, I think I'm fine to drive, or I think I'm fine to whatever, do these things, like maybe you think it, but it's not true. and just using your own analysis is insufficient to get that picture of.
So what would your line be? Like, because all of us speed slightly. I don't think any of us are extreme speeders, but like, where's the line?
Unless you're in Wyoming.
If you're like, don't be, you should have sorry, like be safe is what we were saying, and you can be safe and break the speed limit, but
If you're
also don't go 70 miles per hour in a 35 zone. That's obviously too far. Like, where's the...
Yeah. I don't know. And again, I think it's a wisdom question, so it's hard to analyze. But I do think we should listen to people who can speak into our lives and not just take our own mental picture and call that authoritative. Like, authority exists for a reason, and it's outside of you, and it's standardized in some sense.
Yeah.
And that's in some ways a good thing, because I think we are a very individualist culture, and we want to be like, well, the rules for me are such and such. Like, it's like a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to throw it all out.
Sure. Yeah, actually, this reminds me of something. Jake, you quoted G.K. Chesterton on a previous podcast where he kind of had a rule of
You're talking about the fence?
Yeah.
So it's he basically says, if there's a fence in the middle of the road, you shouldn't take it out unless you can say why it was put there in the first place. And that was kind of his... It was actually talking about, like, specifically inheritance law and some other laws that were being gotten rid of in Britain, kind of like the Parliament was just, like, axing a bunch of laws, and they were creating a lot of social unrest because they didn't know some of, like, the foundations of, like, what was changing because of that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in the sense of, I think sometimes people are just like, I can drive safely, and that's your only consideration. What does safe driving look like for me? But I think going back to the whole, like, why is it a 35 zone here?
Yeah.
Someone did that for a reason. What was that reason? Like, having, like a clear understanding of the laws and why they're there.
Well, and consideration for others. So, for instance, I felt like the guy in this video that I referenced was a little bit of a jerk, because I'm like, your girlfriend is scared in your car. Like, that's not okay. That should be a bigger deal to you than getting there 5 minutes faster. And then secondly, you're weaving through traffic. You're scaring other people. Like, the fact that you feel secure and safe and that you haven't caused an accident, well, that's good for you, but what about the, like, new driver who is their first time on the highway and you just slipped in front of them when they weren't expecting it and it totally freaked them out? You know, like, it's like you're very selfish is kind of like the like the impression I got. So I just want to say, like, the consideration isn't just for you, it's for others too.
Yeah, and I think that the point being, I mean, we were talking about, like, how do you figure it out? And I think that, to me, the drunk driving thing makes sense as, like, a comparison. It's like, number one, you should figure out, am I safe to drive? Partly because you can't take your own blood. Like, no one can tell what percent they're at.
Yeah, do you have
and you could be at 0.05 and be, like, out of it. Or you could be, and so it's like, number one, do I feel like I can do this? And number two, and this is especially true when you have alcohol in you, does someone else who's in right mind think that I'm okay to do it?
Well, and I would say another consideration, Jake, is it's not a speeding ticket if you get a DUI.
Yeah.
So the risk that you're taking with what the sword looks like in that situation is a much bigger risk. So
I'm just trying to say, like, what matters. You were trying to say, how do you make a decision? So about speeding, you make the decision by, is it work for, like, do I believe that I can do it safely? And does someone else of sound mind also believe that I can do it safely?
Yeah, but then I would say, are you willing to pay the speeding ticket?
Yeah.
And then in the case of a DUI, are you willing to take the consequences of a DUI, which are much higher than a speeding ticket? So I would say, like, all of these factors are going to be part of the weight of your decision.
Yeah, so here's the issue I have, is that the statistic is something like 80% of drivers believe they are better than average.
Which means they're not.
I will go on the record and say I am a decidedly average, if not slightly below average driver.
You are amongst the 20% who are honest. I just have known several drivers who are not good drivers, and if I ask them, they're like, no, I'm a good driver.
Yeah.
And I'm a safe driver. And it's like, so let's say everyone listening, for the sake of argument, thinks that they drive safely and that they break the speed limit appropriately. And let's say just for the sake of argument that maybe you don't, and you don't realize that.
Yep.
Like, how could someone move forward with, like, a reflection question or just an honest self-assessment tool to have like an honest look in the mirror. Any ideas for that?
I think that one of the biggest ones, and I think this goes for all of the scenarios we've talked about, which includes trail cutting and breaking housing like permit rules, is would I be mad if someone else was doing what I was doing? Right? Would I be mad if someone else was cutting off trail? No. I think that they should climb the waterfall because it's a lot of fun. Would I be mad? Like, would Janelle be mad at someone for changing one of their rooms into a bedroom without getting a permit? No, she would not. She would not care. And so, in the same way, like, would I be mad if I was going the speed limit and someone cut me off at 90? Yes. Would I be mad if someone was going 75 and a 65? No. Like, it kind of thing where he's like, kind of like put it in someone else's perspective, or if someone was doing it to you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, that's kind of like using the golden rule. I don't think it's perfect because I think
what
people
make people angry is different.
Yeah, and sometimes people who drive crazy don't mind at all if other people drive crazy.
See, I actually find that people who drive, like some of the worst drivers I've known, get really mad at other people who drive poorly. It reminds me of there's a quote from the Great Gatsby book, which is a terrible book. But this lady's like a really bad driver, and this guy's like, "Why are you driving? Like, you should not be driving like this." And she goes, "It takes two to make an accident." And so there is like a level where I think sometimes people who drive really poorly are potentially unconsciously taking advantage of other people's driving well. But they also get pretty upset when other people drive as poorly as they do.
Yeah. Okay, this is a random thing. I've almost gotten in an accident in this particular situation, and I've seen accidents almost happen. And I feel like it's a flaw in our driving system.
Okay.
This is just random. But when you're on the freeway, it's multi-lane, like let's say 4 lanes, and you have like someone in the left lane who wants to move to the second to left lane.
Yep.
And simultaneously, you have someone in the right, the third lane, who wants to move to that same lane.
Yep.
They both put on their turn signals. They both check that no one is in this lane, and it's clear, and it is. And they start merging, and they happen to be in the same space.
Yep. In third world countries and Moldova, they call that the rule of bigger car wins. That's actually literally at one point. I was a guy in Moldova. We were in a van, and the road was so bad that it went down to one lane because of potholes. One lane, like, total for both directions. And he just, like, kept going without slowing down, and this other car kept going without slowing down. He was like, "I got a bigger car, they'll pull off." And they pulled off, like, off the road. And then he was like, "Yeah, it's just how it works." And then a semi-truck did the same thing to him, and he was, like, in this 15-passenger van just, like, going straight off the road. It was like, bigger car wins.
Wow. It's like a little bit like a boat rule, right? And some of the boat rules are like the bigger boat has a hard time navigating, so the little boat has
so you move out of the way. Yeah. But no, yeah. So, I think one of the things that you wanted to bring up, Luke, was that sometimes we're like, let's use wisdom.
Okay.
But some of the laws don't make any sense.
True.
Or what happens if a law doesn't make any sense? Should Christians obey that law? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I think one that it actually goes that I can think of that was actually made was in Mexico City. They for a while they made it so that if you had an even number at the end of your license plate, you could drive every other day, and if you had an odd number on your license plate, you could drive every other day. And they were trying to force people to carpool. And everyone was allowed to drive on Sundays. And it was like, that's a law, and there's an intention of we're going to try to get people to carpool. But what ended up happening was there just became a really big black market for bad used cars that had the opposite number license plate from your good car. And so the smog got worse. But they were following the rule of the law. But like that's an example of a law that like someone was like, this will like force people to do a certain thing for a certain reason, but it's not really a beneficial reason it wasn't the benefit that I think that was worth the squeeze.
And I remember even when we were brainstorming and just chatting about this podcast episode, Jake, you brought up like, okay, like if your rule is, if it's not against God's law, you should obey the government. What if the government makes some silly law like every Wednesday everyone has to wear their clothes backwards?
Yep.
Like,
or bathe in a tub of pudding.
You could do that, right? Yeah, you could do that without breaking God's law, but like that's silly, and I don't think I should have to, like...
And or one that I think a lot of our, and this is maybe a little bit less silly, but an example of a law that that I think a lot of people broke, and probably a lot of the people who listened broke, was curfew for a little while in America during COVID. Unless you have business, you need to be at your house by 5 p.m. I don't know if I know a single person who followed that all the time.
Yeah, I was thinking, I got irritated with our town made a rule where they wanted to do water conservation because they just put in a bunch of developments that have sod. And they were like, yeah, it was basically similar to what you said. If your address was even, you could do one day, and if your address was odd, you could do a different day for watering. But I have a garden. We have a meadow style. We don't have sod anywhere. We don't have an irrigation system, and my watering system is very efficient. It's a drip tape system. It's like the most water efficient thing in Colorado. So I'm like, you are putting these rules in because you just put a bunch of neighborhoods in that have like sprinklers across their entire property, and I need to follow this rule because it was very weird, and I just felt I was like almost a little bit like, can I conserve water in a different way than their prescription? So I don't know. I feel like some of it's like, it's just a little bit like the wisdom question. But I do want to say, don't just take your own mental picture and apply it. Like, I think that's
I mean, I think... So I think wisdom would say you should follow the laws. If you have good reason not to do so...
You should think about it.
You should think about it, and you should be willing to pay the consequence. Like, be ready to pay the consequence and not be mad about that, or like, that's not fair. Like, nope, it's fair. You broke the law. You knew what it was.
About it,
So, with that in mind, have you ever gotten a speeding ticket? Or been pulled over?
I've gotten, I think, only one speeding ticket, and I think I've gotten out of about, 4.
Jake can talk people out of
Jake is a talker.
And I am like a very sociable, nice person, but I freeze up when an officer's talking to me, and I say all the wrong things and like give off bad body language. I think of like, so I almost always get a ticket if I get pulled over, and it's been a few years. Like it's been probably like 5 years actually. Or maybe longer. I don't know. It's been a long time, but I did get a few tickets. And I did one of them. I literally think the Holy Spirit told me to slow down, and I didn't listen. Because I was going to pick up our oldest daughter. She was just a little person at the time, but she... It
was after youth group.
It was after like a youth group event where she couldn't be there, and she was being watched by someone who had a meeting, so I felt like a lot of social tension about it. And I was like speeding to go get her. And I felt a very serious prompting that was like... There's no rush. And I was like, yes, there is a rush. I'm going to get my baby right now. And then I sped and got a ticket. And then when I actually got there even later than I had planned, because obviously sitting on the side of the road for a long time isn't the most time efficient thing, they were just like totally fine. And there was no rush. Like they weren't feeling like tension for... But it was a situation where I was like, I literally think the Holy Spirit told me there's no rush, you can slow down, and I didn't listen.
So there was one time I got out of maybe the biggest ticket that so I had moved to Colorado recently, but I was past the window when I should have gotten my new tags, and I had gotten my new driver's license, but I had lost it. I couldn't find it, and I was speeding 10 miles over, and I got pulled over, and the guy was like, he walked, he was like, license and registration. I was like, good sir, I'm gonna tell you the dumbest thing you've heard today. And he was like, what's that? And I was like, I lost my license this morning, and I haven't been able to get my car registered, and I know I was speeding. And he was like, do you at least have insurance? And I was like, I do have that. And so I talked with him for a little while. He was like, I'll go run your plates and make sure that the car's not stolen from... I still have my Wisconsin license plate on. And so he ran from Wisconsin, and he came back. And he was like, I'm going to let you off on this one. But get your together. And he just walked off. He was a very nice guy.
Wow.
Do you have a story?
I've been pulled over several times for like fix-it ticket things.
Like a brake lights out.
Yeah, brake lights out, running lights out, turn signal out, things like that. I think I've only been pulled over one time for speeding. It was early on in our marriage where we were going to a movie.
We went past the church, I think. It was like pretty close to our church property.
Yeah, but we were like late to go see a movie, and we got a ticket. Yeah, I think that's the only speeding ticket I've ever gotten.
I've gotten like 3. They suck. But I haven't gotten one in a long time. Maybe this is like a new
era.
New era for me.
Yeah. So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the conclusion we've come to is, no, it's not a sin to speed or break minor laws, but they're a good guidepost for our moral decision making. And regardless of what the rules are, what the laws are, in every case, we ourselves are responsible to morally judge what is good and what is not. Whether that be a big thing like people always bring up like Nazi Germany and the Jews. It's like whether it be like a big thing about hiding Jews or not versus whether it be a small thing like speeding or not. Like we are the moral responsibility of if something is a sin or not, if something's safe or not. And that's part of the reason why we have to like actively think about things is because and I would say we can use laws as a good guidepost for our decision making. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think it's something to pray through and consider. Like we're not supposed to go against our consciences, and so if for whatever reason, like your conscience has been formed through life in such a way that like you feel incredible guilt whenever you break the speed limit, don't break the speed limit. Like it's not like we're saying here's what every Christian should do. And also too, I think we need to be respectful if people come to a different conclusion. Like I was just thinking like short public service announcement, like road rage is crazy and on the rise, and almost all of that is rooted in just inconvenience to ourselves. And so if you're comfortable driving 10 over and the person in front of you happens not to be, like take a chill pill. This is an opportunity to exercise patience and maybe spend that time in prayer and just want to encourage all of us to be peaceable and gracious and communicate Christ's love in all of our actions, including our frustrations in driving.
So how much under the speed limit do they have to be going before I can be mad? And with
For me, it's 10.
It's 10. It's 10.
If they're going 10 under, I'm justifiably mad. All right, let me pray for our time. God, thank you for this time to discuss speeding and breaking the law. And it sounds really strange that we all feel okay doing something that's against the law. And yet we also know that so much of life is situational. And would you, Holy Spirit, give each of us guidance and wisdom and knowledge to know where the line is and to have hearts that want to stay away from that? We don't want to sin. And we want to be respectful of our governing authorities. And so would you help show us where those things are that we need to be very careful about and pay attention to? And would you also release us from maybe, I don't know, just being like legalistic about following every single rule to a T, because we know that that's not ultimately what makes us right with you. Jesus does. And help us to grow in our character and becoming people who love you and love others well, whatever that happens to look like when it comes to specific laws. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.